Alright, so in this video I want to go over the different ways that we can use these effectors inside of Cinema. We're not going to go through all of them. We are going to touch on some of them so you can see it. Anything that you would use with Mograph, so if you were to use Motext, you can use this with Mograph as well. I'm going to use it with a cloner to show this just because it's a lot easier to see what is actually happening. So I'm going to make a cube, and I'm going to flatten the cube out. I'm going to grab this and squish it down. I'm going to go hold down Alt. I'm going to grab the cloner, and then I'm just going to space this out. So I want this to be a grid, and I want my thing to be per step, and I'm going to say I want 1 in the Y direction, and I want them to be basically like that. So let's say 200. There we go. And if you look at the cube, this is actually how big the cube is, 200 by 200. So that's why it fits perfectly right there. As I make more of these, you'll see that it just fits more inside that area. Okay. So I'm going to use some of these effectors. Now the way that all the effectors work is once you have a Mograph object, anything that's inside of here pretty much, you can go to the effector and add any one of these. And they all work differently. Some work together or whatever. So I'm going to start off with the very, not the group one, but plane. So I have my cloner selected, I hit plane, and you'll see that it raised up off the ground like a hair. All right. I'm going to click on plane, go to parameter, and you'll see that what this is doing is it's moving the whole shape of this 100 centimeters in the Y direction. And that's just the default. If I set this to 0, it goes back. Okay, so I'm going to leave it at 100 for now. Now you'll also see that I have scale and I have rotation. There's a bunch of other buttons and things to click, but keep it simple. If I go to scale here, even though this says 0, it's basically saying from where it's at, it's scaling at 0 in X, Y, and Z. I'm going to say uniform and absolute. Okay, so now if I hit -1, you'll see that they go away. And basically what it's doing is taking their scale, which is currently at 1, subtracting 1 from it, and we're getting 0. So it's basically putting it back to flat. If I set this to, let's say, -0.5, now we have half the size. Okay. Now this is really neat how we can do this because we're basically we've scaled down and repositioned a whole bunch of objects. Now let's go to rotation and let's say 90 degrees. Oops, not that direction. That direction. There we go. Okay, 90 degrees in this direction. You'll see again we've rotated all of these. All right. So we've positioned them, we've scaled them, and we've rotated them. Now these are also transform mode is relative. It's not absolute. Relative means like relative to its current position or based off its current position. Absolute means like that's the actual number. Again, you'll kind of play with these and understand more of these as you go. Same thing with these transform space node versus effector versus object. Okay, we'll leave those at the default and just play with these translates, rotates, and scales, or positions, scales, and rotates. If I go down to the effector here and I scroll this over, you'll see how everything just kind of animates on and animates off. And this is something you could actually animate. You could set a keyframe here, change your time, set another keyframe, and then control that. Okay. But what we want to do with this is I want to be able to control throughout the entire thing. I want some of these to be, where they originally were, and some of these to be rotated and scaled. That's where this fall off comes in. Okay. Now in version 20, they changed how this is set up a little bit, but we're just going to go in here and make a new fall off. So I'm going to just say linear field. That's what I want. And the linear field is going to be, you'll see it's under here, a separate shape. Now the shape right now is set to linear, which means basically if I zoom in here, we have this plane, this other plane, and it's basically saying, okay, at this side of the plane we're rotated back to the original spot. This side of the plane, everything is rotated and scaled and positioned the way it was before, or the way it was after. If I grab this manipulator in the middle and I scoot that, you'll see how now we can get this like gradation of change happening. Okay, so instead of it all happening at once, or very drastically, if it's closer, it's going to be more drastic. We're getting more of a gradation of those changes. So on the far left here, we pretty much have those back to where they are perfectly flat and non-rotated and non-scaled. On the other side, they're all the way in the other extreme. Now this field could actually be animated. I can move this left or right and control how this is adjusting to that setup. Now this is, it definitely could get confusing with this, but the more time you spend with it, just like everything, you'll get more comfortable doing that kind of thing. Okay, and you can definitely see that there. Now, linear field is just one of these options. You can see all of these different ones are different ways that you can control how this transition happens. If I just go to, let's say, cylinder, you'll see I get a cylinder in the middle here, and as I make the cylinder bigger, I'm able to then control it in a cylinder-esque format. Now, in this case, we don't have any height to this, so the height really doesn't matter. But if I went back to my cloner, and I'm going to set this to, yeah, I guess 100 is fine. If I set this to, let's say, 50, that's probably overkill. I should have set that to like 10. There we go. There we go. You'll see that that is, again, going to affect things, you know, in a different format, especially if if I pull it down, you'll see, hey, it's going away and it's coming back. But I could also take this and rotate it and then push it through here. And again, get different designs, shapes, that kind of thing throughout this. As this thing would animate through, I can control those things transitioning from one direction to another direction. I'm going to take that cloner's count in the middle off again. Okay, so all of these are different things that you could do for that. Linear is typically a good one to use for that. There's also box. Okay, if you had a specific reason for using something like this, like I wanted to radiate from the center outward, that's where you would use cylinder or something. Or if I wanted just one area to be moving around like this, you know, I could have this be the shape that I use. All right. So don't think that, you know, this is like, it's a lot of things. What do I pick? Just, you know, kind of go through them and see. Some of these you're going to see like group field won't do anything. This is actually like a group. If I had multiple fields put together, I could put them inside there. So I'm not going to play with that for right now. Python field is actually like a program. Like this is actually like a little script that gets written. I don't know if this will do anything. Yeah, when I hit play, you can see it. Ooh, fancy. Random field, everything's random. And let's see what else. Shader field. So this is where we can actually connect a material to this. So if I were to, let's say, connect a noise to this, it's actually reading the black and white values from this noise. And in the black areas, there is no change. And in the white areas, there is change. And if I go into that and I take this contrast up some, there it is, we'll see that a lot more. We'll see there's the white areas where it is happening and the black areas where it's not happening. And then what's neat about this is if I take this animation speed up to, let's say, 5, and then I hit play, you can actually see it kind of cycle between these things. Or maybe not. Cycle, yes, absolute. Oh, speed. And then direction. There we go. Come on. I may need to keyframe that. There we go. I just keyframe that, and now you can see, ooh, it's cycling through. So again, there's lots of different ways that we could utilize this kind of thing. Let's clear that out. Back to shader field. There's also sound, so you can actually bring in a sound and then have that sound be what plays or what controls. I'm going to bring in a sound here. Load sound. And if I hit play,
what are you doing in my swamp?
You see it doesn't really do a whole lot. Let me turn that audio down. It's like crazy loud. I'm going to adjust the part of the sound that it's picking up. So right now it was picking up like this area over here, which really didn't have a whole lot of stuff going on. But it looked like most of the volume was in this area. So now I'll hit play.
What are you doing in my swamp?
So if I have something, maybe I animated, I want to show it kind of moving in the background or whatever, or scaling or whatever. we can use that sound field for that. So again, a whole lot of different things you can do just based off of, these fields in here. The effectors, Mograph effectors. These are definitely powerful, and they do some cool stuff. But that field is where we can control where it happens, when it happens, that kind of thing. Trying to find, there it is. Right. So, just to review that real quick again, I had the cloner, I went to Mograph, I went to plane. And plane is simply it's simply just taking everything right now and moving it up 100 centimeters. Let's just do 555 centimeters. And we can scale it to, you can scale it different. So I can do like, negative 0.1, negative 0.5, negative 0.8. Okay. And that'll give you different directions. So instead of all being perfectly the same dimension, they're all different. Or if I did uniform, then they're all going to scale uniformly to that same amount. Okay. Now this is where, if you were to set this to, let's say, -1, where we could actually use one of those effectors, or one of the fields, to have it come in. Okay. Let's go to fall off again. I'm going to go to linear field, and you can pick from the list which one you want, but just if you click linear field, that's going to be a good default to start with. And then make this bigger, and now you can see how this is going to basically come into the scene. Now, what's also powerful about this is that you can stack these on top of each other. So I'm going to go here, let's say there, and I may want this to be not even like perfectly smooth like this. So if I go to linear field here, and I also add in a random field, there it is, you'll see I have a random field and I have a linear field. And as I take that random field and let's say make this, shouldn't need to really make that bigger, yeah, it's just showing that. There you go. So we can see what it's doing here. There's the random pattern that it's generating for this, just so we can kind of visualize it. I'm going to go to the random field, and this basically gives you a random number, okay? Some are up, some are down. You can go to noise, and this will actually create this kind of noisy kind of pattern on it, which you can then pick from the list of things here and get a different kind of pattern. And the idea with the noises is that they're different. I'm going to set this to, let's say, 50. They're different kind of iterations. So you'll see here we're getting this kind of movement with this noise pattern. If I want to preview what it looks like without the noise, I can just turn off linear and just look at the noise. All right, so I'm going to hit play, and we'll see that's what this piezo noise is doing. If I set this to, let's say, cell, this is what that noise pattern does. Okay. If I set this to stupple, that's what that one does. So very easily I can get these kind of like cool moving noise patterns that will also affect my stuff. Now on each one of these noise patterns, where's my noise? There it is. I get used to this thing here. View settings, yes, coordinate field. There we go. I can take the scale down. Okay, the smaller the scale, the more iterations we're getting. Now, if you look at this, we're also getting this like streakiness of how this pattern is happening. It's not really affecting it, vertically like that. I'm going to take this noise pattern and rotate it like this, and you can see from the direction here what this image is looking like. Basically, the noise was facing in one direction, and so now I changed the direction and how it's applied to all these pieces. So now we're getting more of this like all over kind of animation. So you can ignore this shape, really. Okay. Color alpha, yes, good. We can also adjust, let's say, the remapping here. pull that off to 0 or pull this up to 100, you can see how we're basically turning this effect on and off. I'm going to, well, where's the one I want? I want remapping. Let me play with it. Alright, I found what I was looking for. There we go. So under the linear field, under contour, I want to go to curve. There we go. And these are different ways that it allows you to adjust how this is actually happening. So basically this is off, this is on. So if I come down here and I adjust these curves, I can say, instead of having this gradual ease into it, what if it was pretty drastic? Something like that. And then what if on the way out, instead of it just going the way it was doing, what if it did something like this? Okay, and so now if I take that linear field, I'm going to turn off the random field. If I take the linear field and just move it, you'll see now I get this thing where there's no effect, and then now we get that effect. Okay, now the random field here will make things random. You can see randomness comes up and it comes back down. Okay, so it does have that randomness to it. And this can be adjusted in a similar fashion. You could, change the stepping amount. You can change the curve of this. Set to none. Adjust what these handlebars are doing as far as that goes. Or you can just go to the field itself, animate it coming in, coming out, whatever. Now this is a random field, which is different than a random effector. Okay, so turn off that random field, and I'll show you how we can get multiple effectors on there, because that random field didn't allow us to do exactly what I want to do here. I want to take this linear field and just animate this coming in and coming out, let's say. I'll make it a little bigger. And let's make this bigger, but I want it to go higher up, so I'm going to go to the plane, because that's what's controlling it moving up, and I'm going to make this, let's say, 1,000. There we go. So now it comes up even higher. Let's say maybe even 3,300. Cool. So now, cool. All right. So now I'm going to go to back to the cloner. I'm going to go back to Mograph Effector, and there was the plane one that we just added, and that's what moved it straight up and scaled it, and we could obviously add some rotation. Another one I'm going to add in here is random. And you'll see with this one, it's going to do very similar to what the random field did, except now I have complete control over this one, where I can go to the fall off for it, add another linear field, make this bigger, and I'll just scoot it off to the side just so we can see this one at a time. But now I have control over where it's random. So here, as it comes to this direction, there's no randomness to it. As it goes this way, we're getting randomness added in there. Okay, and then these things can be actually animated, so I can actually take the random in the plane and move them left and right. Here it is nice and neat, and then it goes up in the air, it gets kind of distorted, and oh no, it's all broke, right? Or I can do the same thing I did on that random. Here's that same linear field. I can go down to my remapping and come in here and change this to curve, and then play with what that curve is doing. Oops. That's fine. Good enough for now. I'll grab both of these again. Perfectly fine. Comes up in the kind of random, and then perfectly fine again. Okay. Now I could also, let's say, instead of this being perfectly spaced out, let's say I took one of these randoms and I just, let's say, moved it back like this. Okay, so I grab the random field and it's happening here. Actually, I'm going to go the other way. There. I'm actually going to make it bigger. I want it to be bigger than the linear, because I want it to be random at the start and the end of this. And I'm also going to go into the random, go into the parameters, and this is where it's being random. It's randomizing the position X, Y, and Z. So I'm going to say, okay, in the X direction, let's give you 200. Okay, you can see how it randomized a bit more there. And the Z, let's go 100. And then the Y, let's go 500. Okay. So now as I grab both of these again and I move them, you'll see how as it comes in and breaks it apart, they're kind of randomly splitting apart and then flying up. So you have two different things happening. The random is making it randomly positioned, and then the linear is moving it up. So you have two things happening at once, and then coming back down, and then they're kind of settling back after that random passes it. Okay, so you see you can stack these things on top of each other to get these kind of neat effects. Now, under this fall off here, you'll see this says linear field. If I wanted these to have the same linear field, I believe I can just go into this one and just drag this down, and now this linear is also being affected, or is also affecting that random. So we'll see if that's true. Yep. And you'll see it's actually happening to both, right? So it's actually there, it's fine, and then it comes to the side. It's still a little bit, random. I don't think we ever hit right at the bottom here. So let me make sure that this goes all the way down to the bottom. Yep, there we go. See, it wasn't all the way at the bottom. All right. So those are two different ways that you can animate this stuff by using this random or plane. Now you could also go into some of these other ones, and you could do something, let's say, like a formula. And the formula is it's a little bit more outside the scope of what we're going to do. You'll see we have the same parameters, so I'm going to take the X off and just put this as, say 1,000 in the Y direction, and then I'll hit play. And what this is going to do is it's actually animating it based off of a mathematical formula. If I go to Effector, here is that mathematical formula. It's using the sine wave of the ID divided by the count plus time times 360. So that might mean nothing at all to you, and that's fine. Initially, when I got into the stuff, it meant nothing to me too. But if I were to take some of this stuff and let's say, change one of the numbers, instead of 360, I put 50, and then hit play, you'll see how now I get a smoother animation. So you may not understand 100% what it's doing, but you should know enough like, hey, this is a number. What happens if I change one of those numbers? Maybe I can get some neat effects happening on here. You'll see on this too, it's also scaling this down. We could also rotate it, let's say 180. So now we're getting this kind of like flipping motion that's happening on it. All right, and then you could also add, let's say on this fall off here, you could add a randomness. Right, and then hit play, and you get this kind of neat effect. A lot of times what you'll find is with Cinema 4D, with motion graphics, that just being able to see some neat effect and storing it in your warehouse of different cool things you've seen is a nice way to be able to see that. Okay, so we've gone over plane, formula, we've gone over random right here. Another one that is kind of neat is the shader one. And this one is very similar to what we saw in the Effector, where we're able to, again, let's turn that off. Let's go to position. Let's go to, actually let's do scale, right? Let's go to scale. Set that to -1, so they're all gone. Now under the Effector here, or under the shading here, this is where this comes in. So if I were to add, let's say, a noise pattern, okay, again, where it's white, we're getting more of that color happening, or more of the effect. Okay, so there's a lot of white in here, so a lot of things are scaled down. And where it's black, we're getting no effect. And as I go into here and I take that contrast up, it becomes even more apparent. All right. Now where this comes, a little bit more useful, let me clear that, is anything from this list we could actually add inside here. We could load an image and have that image be what gets controlled. Alright, so I'm going to load in here this black and white MCC logo. No, don't copy it to the path right now. And you'll see that it really doesn't, like, we're not seeing anything happen here. Oops. Let's go into that thing. Yes. Alright, now adding it to the shader here, bringing in the image, is not going to work, because it doesn't know how to place that picture. It doesn't know if my stuff is flat or round or whatever. So I need to make a material, and I'm going to turn off color, turn off reflect, and turn on luminance. And I'm going to go in here to load my image. and I'm going to drop this texture onto shader. Okay. Now we can't see it still, so I'm going to just disable shader for a second, and then click on this, and then come over here and hit the texture tab. And I'm going to make sure that my projection is set to flat, and then I'm just going to scale this up. Now you can see how this is being projected is it's being projected basically like straight ahead. Now if I turn my shader back on, let's go back here, let's go to this, I'm going to drop it down into the shader. Luminance, there we go, just set luminance. You'll see how it's like scaling in this weird line because it's basically grabbing part of the image straight down that line. And now as I rotate this, now I can see how it's taking parts of those out. Now the resolution of my MCC logo is definitely not enough pixels to see that. But if I go to my cloner, I go back to my object, let's say I put this at 5,000. Alright, 5,000 was a bit too aggressive. So I set this to 75 by 75. Keep in mind it's duplicating these across, so 75 by 75. I also lowered my size here to 50 and 50, and then that meant I also lowered my cube size to 50 and 50. And now you can see we can actually see the MCC logo in these cubes. And what's neat is that in this case I've used obviously just a still image of the MCC logo, but you could actually use like a video of something. So if you made like a motion graphics piece where you had certain things happening, thinking of the black and whites as basically masks, you could do a whole lot of cool effects with that. Okay, let's delete that. Let's delete this. All right. Let's see. Yeah, there's a sound one too, so that works very similar, like I said before, to the sound effector or the sound field. There's random. Okay. So, and these are just good ones to have in your pocket. Push apart is another good one. It basically does exactly what it says, pushes these apart. You'll see that there's not a whole lot of options here. It's literally the push apart and then how far. You could say hide, and it'll hide ones. I've never used the hide feature. Most of these, again, are going to be benefited from having that linear field or having some kind of field here controlling where that's going to happen. Set that back there, back to the move tool. And you'll see how it actually pushes them apart and like hides them apparently. If I set this to just scale apart, you'll see how it just scales these kind of closer together. And then here's the radius of that. Here's the iterations. So I take this down to be less. I was thinking. Let's do push apart again. Okay, and I believe we should be able to also rotate this. Yep. So we can also rotate it. Now it's all not moving it downward, or yeah, it's not moving it up and down. It's just moving it away from that. So something like push apart is actually probably a better one to use if you had a 3D object inside your stuff. All right. So those are some of the basic ones. I do encourage you to kind of, if you get some time, definitely spend some time going through like what each one of these will do. We'll talk about more of these as we go, but those are the nuts and bolts ones that that you'll use kind of like for a lot. Okay, and then again, all these can be animated. You could animate the drop off as long as it has a shape, so you can have it coming, on or off. Or if you don't have that drop off, you could animate the whole thing by animating this strength field here, and that will animate obviously that strength of how that's happening. Okay, so those are some of the effectors, and we'll get again more into those as we go.